Thank you. I'm so sorry. Okay. I don't want to bore you with the details of how we grade a carcass. Hopefully I can talk to you about the technology that we are currently using. There is so much technology out there that we're not using, which would be really nice to adapt to, but we're restricted by federal regulations. And I want to create a framework for this, just to give you a little bit of background about what grading is about, and then go into the contrast that we're running into. It is so nice to see people face to face. I sit in an office and create slide presentations and things like that. And I find a lot of people are gaining their information from the internet. And as you've already seen from my first slide, the greatest thing about the internet is you can find anything. The worst thing about the internet is you can find anything. And I'd like to tell a little story about my daughter who's attending university right now, trying to get into med school. She was taking a class in biochemistry and they were talking about cell division. And she wanted to get a picture in her mind of this cell division. So she entered cleavage. And she covered up her laptop so fast that it can give us anything and everything. So simply put, grading is a marketing tool that is used by buyers and sellers. And as such, the language has to be precise. It has to be accurate. It has to be consistent. Cleavage wasn't quite precise enough when she was doing her studies. So because marketing, buying and selling of cattle, is considered for the private good, in other words, the average consumer doesn't care about the marketing of cattle, we had an opportunity with grading to let it become privatized. And this happened way back in 1996, and I've been around that long, so Ed, you and I, we're together. So because it's for the private good, it could be privatized, but because it's for the private good, it's also optional. We cannot force anyone to grade an animal or do certain things with respect to grading, which is where technology runs into some problems. But the beauty of it is used for marketing, so it is used quite a bit. So getting back to my framework, I have to give you some background about grading itself. It's not rocket science. It's not highly detailed like animal health is. We look at 5 interrelated factors that influence the value of a carcass or the quality of that carcass. It's the age of the carcass, the sex of the carcass, the conformation, the color of the fat and the lean, and finally the marbling. So those are the 5 parameters. So now we get into the technology and a brief history of the technology that is currently available, that can currently be used if somebody requests to use it, because it is voluntary. So on the left, I'm playing with an instrument that was developed pre-2003 called the CVS camera. This was a very cumbersome unit that you had to place over the ribeye and click the picture. And if you can see from right around there, my white coat was reflecting on the actual ribeye. So the perception was influenced by my white coat. Later developments, and this is a totally different unit, but you can see they enclosed it to reduce the external things that are influencing the image taken by the camera. So that was in, whoops, my 3 didn't show up. It was approved in 2003 by the federal government. So that meant packers could opt to use this technology to facilitate grading. Now it's undergone some improvements. And of course, anytime you develop a technology that's viable, somebody's going to copy it and make it better. So a company from Germany came in, and they were called E+V. They built a camera that was much more ergonomically easy to use. It was a one-handed thing with a pistol that you clicked when you wanted to take the picture. And on the right of this picture, you can see the 2 images that it generates when it's taking the picture. And this is just incredible when you really think about it. If you think about all those criminal shows where they're doing facial recognition, this image, they have trained it to trace just the ribeye, not the rest of the muscling that appears in there. They've trained it to measure the fat. Ooh, look at my shaky hand. Along the side. And they've trained it to identify red versus white. Like, the technology that is there is just incredible. So this is E+V, and E+V is in place at Cargill High River, Cargill Guelph, and JBS in Brooks, Alberta. And in a system like this, of course, the minute you create a system, you have to get it to communicate along the lines. So you've got the the camera right there. And then you've got the camera viewing what he's taken a picture of. You've got somebody inputting what that carcass was, the identification of that carcass to associate the camera image with it. And you've got all the screen displays. A packing environment, even in a cooler, is the most hostile environment you could possibly imagine. There's all sorts of noise and mechanics going on, and things are falling, and it's cold, and there's ice, and there's lactic acid washes. So there's a huge challenge here, and somebody is paying to install the camera, to get it to talk to its communication system, to get those pieces of information talking back and forth, and to maintain that. So here's the image that the camera sends over to the grader. No, I'm a little ahead of myself. But this is the type of information that can be generated. So here you've got SL10, and that's an American grading term, slight. They have all sorts of levels of marbling, and because this system's used in the States and because we copy their marbling, it's analyzing a slight 10. And then you can see the other side is a slight 0. So left side, right side of a carcass are different. Our rules are you have to use the best side. That's not particularly the best thing for a consumer that gets the left side, but that's the rule. So it reports what the grade is, and it also is supposed to be measuring right side, ribeye length, ribeye width, and the fat measurement. And that's not appearing on this particular screen, but it does under normal circumstances. So here's, again, more information. Information generated unbelievably by this system. So again, we've got a small 0. It didn't like this side of the carcass, so it's not giving us any information. And we call it a AAA because it's made small, but it's the very minimum of small. And it's measured the ribeye length width and come up with a lean yield of 53%. And then there are other keys that can be used. All this technology is there. All that information is there. Images aren't kept because they take way too much memory, right? So bits of information are kept. Going back to my framework, when we grade a carcass, we have 5 bits of information: the age, the sex, the conformation, fat and lean color, and marbling. So it's capturing way more than are required for grading. So this technology was developed, and any powerful idea is absolutely fascinating and absolutely useless unless somebody decides to put it to work. 2003, CVS was approved. 2010, E+V was approved. 2011, XL Beef asked to use the technology in their plant to help facilitate grading. And this is XL Beef at that time. Luckily, JBS continued the service. So here's a camera operator. They're putting the gun on. You can see how nice it is. The rib doesn't have to be open quite as much. There's the screen behind the camera operator. Up here on the carcass, which you probably can't see, is a barcode. So before the camera operator takes the picture, somebody's on the line wanding the barcode, and then the picture's taken so the 2 pieces of information are meshed together. So the camera operator has a screen like this, and you can see this one has a red flag in the bottom, meaning, oops, you didn't place the camera right. And that's because you don't see the entire ribeye in this picture. Everything else is fine, but because it missed the entire ribeye, the camera operator would turn around, see that he hasn't taken a good she hasn't taken a good picture, and try to click that gun again before the next carcass is read, before everything happens. So that is one of the things. As I flew here, I realized, you know, it's really nice to have all this technology. But as I'm flying here, I'm glad they have autopilot, but I'm glad there's a pilot in the plane to check things out if the technology isn't quite there. So when the grader sees it, this is a screen after the camera operator screen, they get all the information from the screen, but if in that last image it never got taken the second time, they wouldn't get the image. So they would have to manually assess the grade on the carcass. The grader's also looking at all those factors that the camera doesn't look at. The camera looks at ribeye area, fat cover, and marbling. It doesn't look at the age of the animal, the sex of the animal, or the conformation of the animal. So the grader's quickly putting at those, looks at the screen and says, yes, I disagree, or I agree with that. So this is the grader screen, and this is a much clearer picture of the grader screen. So this one's a modest AAA, so that means it might qualify for some of those special programs because it's higher than a typical AAA. There's been no program entered, but the grader has the opportunity to punch the screen and enter that. And these are all the percentages of lean. So this one came out to a 57.9 on the best side of the carcass. See, this side had no grade. That's the one that the picture wasn't quite accurate. The grader has the opportunity to put in things for yellow fat. If it's a staggy animal, a bullish animal, if the age of the animal exceeds what we accept for our youthful grades, things like that. So that's where the grader can override. Experience at JBS, now JBS, the only plant that's using this, we seldom override what the picture has said. The picture is objective. The grader is subjective. The grader can look at a carcass and say, oh, that doesn't look like a AAA. Then they turn and look at the picture and see what's been illuminated by the flash of light. And it's really, really excellent. So it is really helping us. And because we're getting fed slaughter animals coming through, there's not a mixture of ages. And because everybody knows how to feed a well-conformed animal, we get the dark cutters. We get the yellow fats, which are very unique, things like that, that might have to get an off grade. That's when they'd be overridden. So 2 words, information and communication, are often used interchangeably, but they signify quite different things. Information is giving out. We can spew out as much information as you want. Communication is getting through, and I think that's so critical. Everybody assumes if they can get this information about grading, all the details, everything will be tickety-boo. But if you don't have the getting through of that information, it's really not worth very much. So as we move along this train, and this is again, the only technology we're currently using, there's a thing called a tagger screen. So the grader's input, or agreed or disagreed with the grade, which appears at the top there, a AAA. So the tagger has to put stamps on the carcass. And that's because it's regulated. We're putting this ink on carcasses. The ink's removed well before any consumer sees it. We're trying to get past that point, but we are still dealing with federal government regulations, and they insist we stamp the carcass once per quarter with the yield and quality stamp. So the tagger looks at the screen, he stamps the carcass, and he then indicates where that carcass is going to go into the production line. So the information is getting transferred down the line. It's really, really excellent. So the greatest thing about technology is it's precise. The worst thing about technology is it's precise. And if I can go back to facial recognition, if that camera isn't facing the person, try to recognize somebody from the nostrils. You know, it doesn't work. Or another example, I have a fingerprint reader on my computer. Last night I had to do something with crazy glue. It didn't read my fingerprint anymore because the fingerprint had been destroyed. So things like that, it's so precise that we have to be careful about what we're assessing from that technology. This gives you an example, and again, quality of photography is not my asset. Here's 2 steaks on a tray. They were probably steaks cut 1-2 on a rib. The back one looks much smaller than the front one, and that's all because of perspective. If that camera is not placed accurately, there's a difference in the perspective and the perception of the camera. Now you might think I'm getting a little bit negative about technology. That camera is objective. It is amazing. And I'm going to go through some images of ribeyes. These are 2 Canada A's. Pretty basic, pretty simple. The camera will look at those as if it's never seen another ribeye before and assess them. A grader will look at those, and perhaps if they saw the one on the right first, the one on the left, their perception might be that it's got not enough marbling. You know, you're influenced. As human beings, we're influenced by the last thing we saw or whatever. The camera isn't. The camera does a digital analysis of every image, and it's amazing. Talking about communication and information, that left side picture, if we could get them all to look with the amount of fat on the right side picture, wouldn't that be ideal? We wouldn't be wasting all that feed to put the external fat on the carcass. We get into a AAA, and the percentages up top are 2014 averages in Canada, the number of carcasses graded in Canada that went AAA. So we've really cranked that up since we went to marbling. And there's the lovely Canada Prime. But again, you can see a grader would say, oh yeah, that one's Canada Prime, no problem. Well, maybe not, because these pieces of fat, they might be connective tissue. Maybe I should discount them and things like that. The camera's objective. It looks at the fat, it discounts large pieces, but it doesn't eliminate them, and calls these both prime, even though this one looks a little bit vacant in that area. So just to recap on the technology aspect, grading is voluntary. Therefore, technology is voluntary. Cargill, High River, Cargill, Guelph, Ontario, both have the technology installed. They use it internally, but we don't get to use it to assist our grading. So only one establishment in Canada is actually using technology to facilitate grading, which I think is really sad, because every other plant is subjective grading. It's based on the grader and whether he's got rose-colored glasses on or not, and whether he has a hangover or she. Unfortunately, with technology, the information isn't necessarily communicated. That's huge. And the grading regulations are slow to change. We're unable to take advantage of some of the technologies. There's technology down in the States that assesses meat color. There's still a grader assessing meat color in Canada. We have dark colors, we have bright colors. There are technologies that are looking like they can assess tenderness, and that isn't even part of our grading parameter. Age, sex, conformation, blah, blah, blah. No tenderness. So there's opportunities there that we'd love to get to. So now getting to the point of change. Oh, yeah, my favorite quote of all time. The factory of future will have only 2 employees, a man and his dog. The man will be there to feed the dog. The dog will be there to keep the man from touching the equipment. I can see that coming. I can really see, I mean, that last picture that Edouard had. So the greatest thing about the federal regulations is that the government's involved. In other words, when I'm talking to groups coming in from other countries, they respect the fact that the federal government has an oversight of grading, has an influence on grading. It's very important when we're talking about international marking. The worst thing about our regulations is that the government is involved. 2011, cattle producers across Canada sent a letter to the minister saying, we want to go to the US system of yield grading using 5 yield classes. And the minister said, that's very nice, we'll have to go through the due process. We're at 2016, nothing has happened, okay? So it's frustrating. We are low man on the totem pole when it comes to beef production because we're not quality and safety, and rightfully so. I mean, Canadian Food Inspection Agency is about food inspection, not about quality assessment. So I've got my fingers crossed. The Conservative government introduced a Safe Food for Canadians Act, which received national assent in 2012. And that act says you can incorporate things by reference. In other words, there's a meat inspection manual right now that everybody calls the law. It's God. You can't do anything else but the meat inspection manual. The regulations currently are regulations. They're under the act. If we could get them called law but be outside of the regulations, then the industry could manage them. And that is our big hope. And then we could get more flexibility, more responsiveness to those regulations. I was dancing last year because I thought everything was going to happen. They had written up new modernized regulations and everything, but then we had an election. So everything goes back, not completely back because we believe there's full support of the government, but it goes back to square one. So today, to get a regulatory change, and that's what it is, a regulatory change, the industry identifies a concern. 2011, they sent a letter. We want 5 yield classes so we can have equivalency with the United States. They bring that concern to the government. They request a change, and you wait. And they say, well, we're not going to do it now because this is coming on, and we're not going to do it now because this is coming on. Once they finally say we're going to do it, it will have to be published in a thing called Canada Gazette 1. And Canada Gazette 1 is a federal document that says, people of Canada, this is what we're going to do. And you get to comment on it. And then after the comment period, if everybody agrees with things, it'll get final publication in Canada Gazette 2. The modernized regulations will have to go through this process. In the future, we hope, with modernized regulations, the industry will identify a concern. They'll bring the concern to an authority, and I'm going to call it the Carcass Grading Authority. Canadian Beef Grading Agency will probably be the administration office for it, but we can't be involved because that's like the fox guarding the chicken coop. So we'll just be there to support things. And then there'll be a full assessment of the proposed changes, the 5 yield classes. Let's use that for an example. And then we'll ask for support from industry, which we know exists already. And it will be implemented, plain and simple. The thing is, it won't be called a regulation. It'll be called a requirement. But it will be referred to by the federal government in their new modernized regulations and therefore have the power of law, which is really, really nice. But I'm waiting. Next. That's it. We've only just begun. I hope changes are coming. The latest time frame on this is 2017 now, that we might have the Safe Food for Canadians Act in place, modernized regulations, and be responsible for our own grade requirements. Any questions?